Hello and welcome. The first pagan revival after the coming of Christianity was led by the Emperor Julian. In broad summary, the Roman Empire underwent a process of Christianization in the 4th and 5th centuries AD. Christianity went from being a despised minority sect to being the state religion. The figure who initiated this process was the Emperor Constantine, who reigned from 306 to 337 AD. Constantine is one of the most remarkable figures of the ancient world. During a period of civil war in 312, he was said to have had a mystical vision from the Christian god before a crucial battle. He won the battle and became a Christian. This development did not come out of nowhere. Roman culture had had a tendency towards a form of monotheism focused on the sun god. Constantine was part of this trend. He was a devotee of the solar deities Apollo and Sol Invictus. To some extent, Constantine continued to go along with the old pagan ways after his victory, but he broke new ground by supporting his new faith. In 324, he had his pagan co-emperor Licinius executed, leaving Christianity unchallenged as the religion of imperial power. Rather suddenly, Europe's pagan traditions found themselves on the wrong side of history. Yet a number of things stopped the history of the 4th century from being a simple story of Christian triumph. There were bitter internal fights within the Christian camp, such as the Arian heresy, which split the Christian world down the middle over the question of whether or not Christ is fully God. And paganism was not yet dead. The pagan fightback is associated in particular with the reign of the Emperor Julian from 361 to 363. It was Julian's reign that saw the last revival of paganism before the era of unbroken Christian domination. Julian was a philosopher and mystic who ended up as emperor almost by accident. Christians have traditionally despised him. He was conventionally called Julian the Apostate, because he was brought up as a Christian and he consciously rejected that faith. There was little in Julian's background to suggest that he would end up as a champion of paganism. He was the nephew of Constantine himself. It's quite odd that a young man who was raised in the severely Christian and military environment of the imperial family could end up writing lines like these. "O mother of gods and men, you who share the seat and throne of great Zeus, life-giving goddess, lady of good counsel and providence, creator of our souls, grant to all humanity happiness, the greatest part of which is knowledge of the gods. May the fruit of my devotion to you be to know the truth of the doctrines concerning the gods, to be perfect in divine magic, to have virtue and good fortune in all political and military works that I undertake, and to have a painless and honourable end to my life, together with good hope of journeying to the gods." Julian seems to have been an unusual character. As a student, he was regarded as eccentric by his classmates, a kind of Sheldon Cooper. It's clear that he was a secret pagan at least by the time he was 20, and possibly before that. When Julian was still in the closet, he visited the ancient city of Troy. The local bishop was a man called Pagan, who was also rumoured to be a closeted pagan. Julian noticed that pagan altars were still burning, and that a statue of the ancient Trojan hero Hector had recently been anointed with oil. He asked Pagan cautiously whether this meant that the people still engaged in pagan worship. The bishop replied, also cautiously, that it was surely appropriate that they would venerate a great man from their own city, just as Christians venerated the martyrs. The bishop led Julian to a temple of Athena and showed him the statues there, which were perfectly preserved. Julian noticed that he didn't make the sign of the cross in the usual Christian way as he did so. The bishop also took Julian to the tomb of the hero Achilles, which he approached, quote, with great piety. An encounter like this captures some of the spirit of the time, as paganism was still a covert presence in the Roman ruling class. It's a little like two gay men sizing each other up in the 1950s. Julian's life changed forever in 355, when, in his mid-20s, he was suddenly transported from being a young philosopher to the position of Caesar, or deputy emperor. Julian proved to be surprisingly good at the imperial work of soldiering and administration, although he still shared his pagan views with only a few people. He even approved a decree banning pagan worship. In 360, Julian's soldiers hailed him as Augustus, or senior emperor. Civil war was narrowly averted when the incumbent Augustus, Julian's cousin Constantius, conveniently died in 361. After attaining the imperial throne, Julian revealed his paganism openly. Temples were reopened and rebuilt. Sacrifices began again. The privileges of Christian clerics were revoked, but Julian did not renew his predecessors' persecutions of Christians, although he did discriminate against them. Julian promoted an intellectual version of paganism that was some distance from popular religion. Ironically, it was also influenced by the Christian enemy. Julian's response to the rise of the Christian Church was to try to create a rival pagan one. He acted as a kind of pagan pope, sitting at the apex of a polytheistic priestly hierarchy, embracing an ascetic celibate lifestyle, sending out encyclicals, and preaching the good news of his gospel, albeit one based not on the teachings of Jesus and his apostles, but on the philosophy of Plato and his successors. Julian accepted that paganism had failed the poor, and he resolved that his new pagan church would compete with Christianity in charitable works. Julian died less than 2 years into his reign. Most of that time was taken up with military matters, and he died from a wound received in battle against the Persians. This poses one of the great what-ifs of world history. What if Julian had lived to restore the Roman Empire to paganism? Perhaps the year 363 is one of those great historical turning points, like 1492 and 1789, in which the course of human affairs is permanently altered. Yet Julian was an eccentric figure, and his cause was not a popular one. That's why, by the time of his death, he had failed to build a serious movement that would outlast him. If he had lived, Julian's endeavours might well have been too little, too late. By the 360s, Christianity was too powerful and resilient an opponent for the strange young philosopher general. Julian has become something of a symbol or an icon. He has been written about, admired and condemned in a way that seems entirely disproportionate for a man who ruled for only 20 months. For Christians, Julian the Apostate was a traitorous enemy who came to be seen as a precursor of the Antichrist. For more sympathetic observers, he has come to be an intriguing, even heroic figure, a dorky young man who accidentally turned out to be the last pagan. He has caught the attention of later religious dissidents from Voltaire to Edward Gibbon to Gore Vidal, and he has acquired a small following among modern pagans. His supposed last words addressed to Jesus Christ were famously quoted by the Victorian pagan-friendly poet Algernon Swinburne. "Thou hast conquered, O pale Galilean, the world has grown grey from thy breath. We have drunken of things Lethean, and fed on the fullness of death." But Julian's ascetic philosophical world was pretty grey too, at least by the standards of a romantic poet like Swinburne. The break of 363 was not an absolute one. Pagans still comprised at least a large minority of the population. But the Roman state mostly went back to Christianity as usual. The Christian faith was by now intimately associated with Roman power, with the sovereignty of God in heaven mirroring the supremacy of the emperor on earth. There were no anti-pagan persecutions, but the old religion's space for operation steadily contracted in the face of legal and financial restrictions. As one scholar put it, the pagan old guard sometimes seemed as influential as the president of Polaroid in the age of the smartphone. But paganism wasn't dead. It never is. It was only sleeping. We'll come back to the next part of the story in the next video. If you want to learn more about the subject of pagan revivals, you may like to buy this book, which is out in October and currently open for pre-order. Paganism Persisting, from Exeter University Press, which I wrote with the historian Francis Young. It's available from the usual outlets.